Let's all remember that the things that made America great, limited government, free markets, sound money, no central banking system, and abiding by our Constitution, is why our country was great. Friend, we have let our government abandon all these principles and move us rapidly into a socialistic, fascist, un-American disgrace. Bush announced yesterday his plan for the auto manufacturers, as we said he would do in some form, $13.4 billion in loans that would have to be repaid in 4 months. My question is, what is their credit rating? Why is there no equity like in the real estate holdings? Are we to believe the big three had practically no cash reserves? Why couldn't they secure any financing through normal means, private banks, rather than the government, which puts me and you on the hook for the loans? And if the economy continues to contract, as all indications are that it will, how are they going to repay these loans in 4 months? Smoke and mirrors. They will not repay these loans, at least not in 4 months, more like 4 years if ever. Socialism in action. On Thursday, Bush actually said, and I quote, "We have to abandon free market principles to save the free market system," end quote. Complete doublespeak. What a hypocrite. How ridiculous. But sadly, the American people sit back in blind hope that this can somehow fix our economic freefall. Like I have said earlier, we're at the beginning of this, and these bailouts and loans are but a band-aid to prolong the inevitable. The free market should have been left alone to correct itself. Are we to believe our government that has managed its own budget into $11 trillion deficit can manipulate us out of this financial disaster that they allowed and caused with help from our corrupt federal banking system? Our government blatantly moves into socialism, the total complete disregard for the will of we the people. This week was no different, and we will continue to report on this ongoing travesty. We will be joined shortly with our guest, Rebecca Moore of the Iraq Veterans Against the War. I personally have opposed this war from the beginning, so I think it will be interesting to get the perspective from an actual Iraq veteran. Brian, would you like to comment on your views of the war, but before we go into some of the other news?
Yes, I mean, it's a total lie. Of course, we go into WMD. We were lied to horribly to get us into this war. Practically is about any war. It's, of course, as I'm going to go into in a moment, about the military-industrial complex, money, control, oil. It has absolutely nothing whatsoever, I can't emphasize this enough, to do with democracy, freeing the people of Iraq.
Amen.
The military-industrial complex impacts on the Third World. This is excerpts by an article by Professor Aziz Qadri from Global Research, December 11th, 2008. Militarized capitalism, the military-industrial complex in 2008. What is the military-industrial complex in 2008? Where is it? What does it look like? I'm not even sure if the phrase used so famously by former U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower in 1961 is the best descriptor to encompass the many tentacles and facets of the war and security industry and the links and connections between capital and its political allies. Do terms like defense industry and arms trade adequately encompass the face of today's war profiteers, whose devastating impacts can be equally found in the high-tech apartheid wall being built by Israel to seal off the West Bank and Gaza, in private corporate mercenary armies like Blackwater, DynCorp, and Aegis in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, and the outsourced intelligence, IT interrogation, and translation services of L3 and Titan, the massive military aid budgets which the U.S. gives to governments of Israel, Pakistan, Egypt, and Colombia, among others, and in the hearts and minds operations of U.S. Special Operations Forces based in the Philippines. Hired guns, big bucks, no rules. Private armies hired by governments and companies are not new. The British East India Company hired private mercenaries to fight proxy wars and gain control over India. But the exponential growth and sophistication of globalization of private security industry contractors like Blackwater and DynCorp, both of which have derived well over 90% of their business from the U.S. government contract, is striking. If regular soldiers often literally get away with murder, how much more so for private mercenaries, given the lack of any oversight of their activities under no effective regulatory regimes, although they are contracted by governments and paid out of public funds. They operate with impunity and immunity. They recruit and deploy former military police from around the world, some of them veterans of the most repressive military forces in the world. On their website, Blackwater, whose contract with the U.S. State Department was recently renewed despite outrage at one of many incidents in which their guards shot and killed 17 Iraqi civilians in Nisar Square, Baghdad last September, claim, "We treat others with the highest degree of dignity, equal opportunity, and trust. We respect the cultures and beliefs of people around the world." On the ground, Blackwater has no respect for the Iraqi people, an Iraqi Interior Ministry official told the Washington Post in 2007. They consider Iraqi people like animals, although actually I think they may have more respect for the animals. We have seen what they do in the streets. When they're not shooting, they're throwing water bottles at people and calling them names. If you are terrifying a child or an elderly woman, or you are killing an innocent civilian who's riding in their car, isn't that terrorism? All dollars and no cents. A February 2008 Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation report notes that, adjusted for inflation, the Pentagon budget for fiscal year 2009 is the largest since World War II, $515.4 billion, more even than during the Vietnam and Korean Wars or the peak of Reagan's Cold War spending. The U.S. spends more than the next 45 highest spending countries in the world combined. Accounts for 48% of the world's total military spending, 5.8 times more than China, 10.2 times more than Russia, and 98.6 more times than Iran. A license to kill, the facade of arms control. Identifying and tracking the many tentacles of the weapons and agents of mass destruction is frustratingly difficult. For all the criticisms of the third world government, secrecy and lack of transparency in terms of defense spending and military operations, so many loopholes exist in so-called first world countries with regards to arms control. For example, many military shipments from Canada to the United States go untracked, since they do not require government permits because of defense agreements signed between Ottawa and Washington in the 1940s. Some critics have noted that the export licensing requirements are so minimal that it is possible that some of that equipment moves to third parties. Militarized repression of dissent in imperialistic globalization. Many governments from the Philippines to India to Colombia are waging overt and covert wars against resistance movements and government opponents, fostering a climate of fear in which arms and equipment are used for containing domestic dissent and security crackdowns against the enemy within, resistance movements of the poor, mobilizations of women, indigenous peoples and the landless, peasants and workers, movements against free trade and agreements, neoliberal reforms. Conflicts over land access to resources are fueled and exacerbated by militarization of corporate activities such as mining, oil, gas, industrial farming, and forestry industries. For example, a U.S. District Court judge has agreed there is evidence showing that a Chevron-paid and equipped Nigerian military and police shot and tortured protesters opposing the oil company's activities in the Niger Delta region. Freeport-McMoran paid an Indonesian military police and private security forces who attacked local communities around his Grasberg gold and copper mine. And let's not forget how the founder and chief executive of Aegeus, former British Army Lieutenant Tim Spicer, was also founder of Sandline, another mercenary company contracted by the Papua New Guinea government over a decade ago for $36 million for an ill-fated attempt to put down the indigenous independence movement in Bougainville, which has been shut down at a huge copper mine owned by subsidiary Rio Tinto, the military and the monetary indeed. And we're going to go ahead and play a clip here from the former President Dwight D. Eisenhower, his farewell address on January 17, 1961. in which he took the opportunity to warn the American people of the ominous potential